Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. Join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Ideal Investor Show, where I like to give you updates and necessary information and hopefully useful information in the context of residential real estate, passive income, positive cash flow, and how you can actually structure your portfolio so you have the opportunity to retire early. And one of the things I want to share is based on an experience that I've been going through the last 6 months, and I am not making a big deal. I don't want anybody to cry tears for me or anything like that. But what has been happening is that out of the 10 properties that we own in my portfolio, we currently have 3 that are unoccupied and in the process of being set up for remarketing. And out of those 3, 2 had to go through evictions, and 1 was almost going through eviction, and then the tenant decided to leave before they got the eviction label by the court on their name and on their record. So in a way, all 3 kind of, if I were to say it, had to go through eviction. And what happened is that these were not tenants who just got into the house for a short period of time and then suddenly basically stopped paying. Most of these tenants had been in these houses for quite some time. And we asked them and interviewed them and tried to find out what is actually going on. And what we learned is that their financial situation in the context of how much expenses they have for their kids, for the school, for the clothing, for the car, for the gas, and all these kind of things, normal consumables kept going up. And this is why I'm sometimes getting angry when we see the government statistics that lead us to believe that the inflation rate is at like 2 point something or 3%. When you talk to people, they say, well, that's not my reality. My reality is that my food cost is way higher, my gas cost is way higher, my rent cost is way higher, my insurance cost is way higher. And so sooner or later, because people have not kept up, and not by their own fault, but in general, the economy has not increased wages anywhere nearly similar to what has happened to prices. And so what's called the disposable income, meaning the amount of money that people actually have left over at the end of the month after they pay the necessities to do anything, has basically evaporated. And the first reaction was that people had accumulated some savings during the COVID pandemic, and they tapped into those savings. And that worked out for a little while. The next thing that happened is that they realized, okay, well, the savings are gone. What do I do now? And they tapped into their credit cards. But when you look at the statistics, you will see that credit card debt has exploded. Also partially, by the way, the reason why people, or in general, well, no new cars or very few new cars are being sold, because most of the new cars are being sold with financing, and it's hard to get financing if you have basically no savings, all your income is spent every month, and you have already tapped out your credit cards, right? So the banks are looking at that and say, well, you can't really afford a new car. So what do? You keep the one that you have, right? So all those kind of things are leading to the point that what is really happening and what is really necessary is for us as residential real estate investors to encourage, strongly encourage your property management organizations, not just to look for somebody who can on first glance afford to pay the rent that you're asking, but really look that they can afford to pay the rent relatively comfortable, and ideally that the rent is not just paid by one person. Right? So if you have a single family home, like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, or 4-bedroom, 1.5-bath, or anything like that, it is very likely that your tenants are going to be a family, like, a couple with kids or something like that. And you want to take a look at what is their income situation, and are they both working, or is one of them working, or whatever the situation is, because you want to lower the risk that some event that happens with their employment or their income will really get you in the situation of having to ultimately evict your tenants of several years prior, where they paid every month like clockwork, and then suddenly they stop paying because they just don't know where to find the money anymore. That's the situation that we are facing, and that seems to be going around. And I have these properties in multiple locations around the country, so it's not just in one spot. And I want you to be aware of that. And I want you to be in communication with your property management organizations, because they are much, much clearer, and they have hopefully their hand on the pulse of what's going on in the community, and they can give you some insights of how shaky any of your tenants may be when it comes to the ability to pay the rent. The message for today, really, really be vigilant and make sure that you also consider this when you're coming up to your lease renewal. Make a point that the tenants give your property managers some insight of how their financial situation has actually evolved since the last renewal. Because if you want to increase the rent by $50 and they're already, or $100, and they're already struggling to pay what it is right now, and they're telling you our expenses have exploded, but our income is basically the same, then you really need to ask yourself, do you want to take that risk, or are you going to be content with keeping the rent the way it is? Bottom line, I can say out of my own experience over many, many years, it is better to have somebody who regularly, dependently pays the rent, even though it's below market rate, than not having any rent at all. Now, that's not a long-term solution, and that is not how you actually make a lot of profit, but you need to be flexible with the economic circumstances. And while the government is making us believe that the economy is doing great, the reality that I see, and I encourage you to look at your situation as well, the reality that I see is in the locations that we have properties, the economy is not great. And people are really struggling because their income is not sufficient to pay everything that they need to pay. So that's it for today. If you want to discuss this further, if you want to strategize a little bit on how do you actually set up your lease agreements, how do you set up the communication with your property managers, how do you actually make sure that as soon as there is an opportunity to lower your costs so that you can maybe afford not to increase the cost of your tenants, then go to idealinvestorshow.com and find the button to book a call so we can have a conversation about it. And you can do this even if you're not a client. I'm happy to talk to anybody, and sometimes we find out that it might be a good idea to become a client, but even if not, then I'm always there to help you, because we're all in the same boat. We all want to accomplish something, and to do this, we need to share all the information necessary to make that happen. So be well and stay safe, and I talk to you tomorrow.